I came home early from my walk on the morning of my 64th birthday because my hip was aching from the cold. November in Hamilton has a way of settling into your bones like it belongs there, gray and damp and unrelenting. My son had told me to arrive at his house by noon for birthday lunch, and it was barely 10:30. But he'd given me a key 2 Christmases ago and said to use it whenever I liked. So I did. I let myself in through the side door off the garage, the way I always did, and I stood in the mudroom, pulling off my wet boots, listening to the house. I could hear voices from the kitchen, my son's and my daughter-in-law's, low and quick the way people talk when they think no one is listening. I almost called out to let them know I was there. I had my mouth open to do exactly that. Then I heard my name, my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp and certain the way it always was. Eleanor's not going to live in that house forever. She's 64 today. Frank's been gone 3 years. What is she doing rattling around in 4 bedrooms by herself? My son said something quieter. I couldn't make it out. I'm just being practical, she said. The market is still good in that neighborhood. If we listed in the spring, we could probably get close to 900. After fees, that's still enough to clear our line of credit and have something left over. Silence. Dan. We've been carrying this debt for 2 years. 2 years. And she's sitting on a paid-off house worth nearly $1 million. Our house, eventually. My son's voice, finally, careful and low. She's not ready to move. You know how she is about that place. So we help her get ready. We start mentioning it, planting the idea. Assisted living has come a long way. She'd probably love it once she was there. And then we handle the sale ourselves. Yeah, a pause. It's not like we're doing anything wrong, my daughter-in-law said. It's going to happen eventually. We're just thinking ahead. I stood in the mudroom in my stocking feet, and I did not make a single sound. The tile was cold through the wool. Outside, a streetcar went by on King Street, that familiar low rumble I'd heard my whole adult life. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, the way my doctor had taught me for anxiety, the way I'd used to breathe when I was sitting across a boardroom table from a client whose numbers didn't add up. 31 years as a senior accountant teaches you to keep your face still when the numbers tell you something terrible. I put my boots back on. I went back outside. I sat in my car in their driveway for 4 minutes, and then I drove to the Tim Hortons on Barton Street, and I ordered a medium double-double, and I sat by the window, and I watched the gray November street, and I thought about what I was going to do. I didn't cancel lunch. I drove back at noon, knocked this time, and smiled when my daughter-in-law opened the door with a balloon tied to the handle and said, "Happy birthday, Eleanor. We're so glad you're here." My grandchildren ran at me from the hallway, my grandson wrapping his arms around my waist and my granddaughter pressing a handmade card into my hands, green marker on yellow construction paper, a lopsided birthday cake with too many candles. I sat at my son's kitchen table and I ate the butter chicken my daughter-in-law had made, which she knew was my favorite, and I helped my grandson with the puzzle he'd brought to the table, and I laughed at my son's jokes. And the entire time, somewhere behind my eyes, I was making a list. My husband Frank used to say I was the most organized person he'd ever met. He wasn't wrong. When he died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer. Very fast. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end, everything was filed, sorted, documented. The will, the accounts, the insurance policies. I'd kept it all in order because that's what I did. That's who I was. And now I sat at my son's table and smiled and ate birthday cake, and in my head I was filing and sorting and making a plan. That evening, after I'd hugged my grandchildren goodbye and promised my grandson I'd come to his hockey practice on Thursday, I drove home to the house on Herkimer Street that Frank and I had bought in 1989 for $112,000. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with the maple tree we'd planted the year our son was born. I walked through every room the way I had when I first heard Frank's diagnosis, slowly, touching things, remembering. Then I poured a glass of the Niagara Pinot Noir we'd bought at the winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake last summer, the last trip we'd taken together before he got sick, and I sat at the kitchen table and I opened my laptop. I wasn't angry. That's what surprised me. I had expected to feel that hot, tight thing in my chest I'd felt at Frank's funeral when the minister said the wrong things, but I didn't feel it. I felt clear. I felt like I'd just run through a balance sheet and found the discrepancy I'd been looking for, the one that explained everything that hadn't been adding up. My daughter-in-law wasn't planning something new. She was waiting for something she'd already decided was hers. The next morning, I called my old colleague Carol, the one who'd worked in my department for 12 years before she left to run her own financial planning practice. We'd stayed close, lunch every couple of months, texts on birthdays. She answered on the second ring. "Ellie, you're up early." "Carol," I said, "do you still work with clients on retirement transitions? Seniors downsizing? That sort of thing?" A brief pause. "Yes, it's actually most of my practice now." "Why?" "I want to look at my options. Not eventually. Now." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you all right?" "I'm completely fine," I said. "I just think it's time I made some decisions for myself before someone else makes them for me." We met for coffee at the cafe on James Street North that afternoon. I told her what I'd heard. Not with heat, just the facts, the way I'd always presented findings to clients. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always appreciated about Carol. "There are some very good, independent living communities in the lower city," she said when I'd finished, "and some in Burlington, along the lake. I've helped a few clients transition recently. They're not what people picture when they hear senior living. They're more like, 'Show me,'" I said. She had a folder on her tablet. She knew me well enough not to waste time. We looked at 2 communities that afternoon through the screen and arranged a tour for the following day. The first one wasn't quite right too far from the escarpment trails where I like to walk. The second one, a place called the Harbor View on the Burlington waterfront, was something else entirely. 6 stories of brick and glass overlooking Lake Ontario, a dining room that served actual food, a library with a fireplace, a studio space for painting and ceramics, a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor with a balcony facing the lake. I stood on that balcony in my winter coat and looked out at the water and thought about how Frank and I had always said we'd spend more time by the lake when we retired. He hadn't gotten the chance. "How much?" I asked. Carol told me. It was significant and entirely manageable, particularly if I sold the house. "There's a waiting list," the administrator said. "A kind woman named Patricia, who wore sensible shoes and spoke without condescension, which I appreciated. Usually 3 to 4 months. What if I could commit today?" I said, "with a deposit." Patricia looked at Carol. Carol looked at me. "Let me see what we have available," Patricia said. By the time Carol dropped me home that evening, I had a move-in date of February 1st and a receipt for my deposit in my email. The following Monday, I called James Patterson, the estate lawyer who'd handled Frank's will. His office was in a Victorian building on King William Street, the kind of office with high ceilings and actual bookshelves. Law books nobody read anymore, but nobody could quite bring themselves to remove. He shook my hand across the wide mahogany desk and asked what he could do for me. "I need to revise my will," I said. Significantly, he opened a fresh file on his screen. "What kind of revisions are we talking about?" I'd spent the weekend thinking about it carefully. Not in anger, not in hurt, but in that same clear-headed space I'd lived in at work for 31 years when the numbers required honesty rather than comfort. Currently, my estate goes in equal shares to my son and his wife. I want to restructure that entirely. I laid out what I'd decided. Trust funds for my grandchildren, equal amounts held until they turn 25 and not accessible to their parents in the meantime. 20% to Sick Kids Foundation, 20% to Food Banks Canada, 15% to the Hamilton YWCA, the remainder to be distributed at Mr. Patterson's discretion among local charities he judged to be doing meaningful work. He set down his pen. "Mrs. Whitmore, that's a significant change. Are you certain you want to exclude your son entirely from the direct inheritance? His children will be provided for, I said. Better than they would be if my son and his wife had access to a lump sum during a period of financial stress. And there are a lot of people in this city who need help far more than a couple managing a line of credit. May I ask what prompted this? I met his eyes. He was a careful man, Mr. Patterson, methodical. I respected that. I overheard a conversation that told me my son and his wife are treating my eventual death as a financial strategy. I'd rather make sure the money does some good for people who aren't simply waiting. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, the way methodical people nod when they've taken in all the relevant information and made their assessment. I understand. Given the circumstances, I'd suggest a revocable living trust structure, harder to contest, and it keeps the assets out of probate. He paused. I'd also strongly recommend we document your capacity at the time of signing. A brief assessment, standard practice, but protective. Whatever you think is prudent, I said. And Mrs. Whitmore, complete confidentiality. Nothing leaves this office. That's why I came to you, I said. We spent the next 2 hours going through the documents. I had everything with me, organized in the binder I'd put together after Frank died. Account numbers, the RRSP and TFSA statements, the investment portfolio, the property deed, the insurance. Mr. Patterson made notes and asked sharp questions, and I answered all of them. When I left his office and walked out into the cold December afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in 3 years, maybe longer. The following Thursday, I went to my grandson's hockey practice as promised. I sat in the cold arena with a Tim Hortons in my hand and watched him skate. 9 years old and absolutely fearless on the ice, falling, and getting up and falling again with the complete ease of someone who hasn't yet learned to be afraid of the fall. His father sat 2 rows down from me. We talked the way we always did, easy and ordinary, about the boys skating, about my granddaughter's school play, about whether the Leafs had any hope this season, which they did not. I watched my son's face when he talked about his children, and I saw the person he'd been before he married a woman who'd taught him to think about everything in terms of what it cost and what he'd get. He loved them. That was real, but love had gotten tangled up with money and fear, and now he was sitting in a hockey arena talking to his mother about minor peewee hockey while his wife was at home calculating what I was worth. I didn't tell him anything. I smiled and drove home and called Carol to confirm my move-in date. The week before Christmas, a realtor named Michelle Park came to the house on Herkimer Street. She'd been recommended by a woman in my book club whose mother had sold her place the previous spring. Michelle was sharp and direct and didn't waste time on sentimentality, which was exactly what I needed. The market softened a bit from the peak, she said, walking through the main floor with her tablet. But a house like this, in this neighborhood, 4 bedrooms, original hardwood, the backyard we're still looking at, strong interest. I'd list at $865. We might see multiple offers. Good, I said. She looked up from the tablet. You'd want to list after the holidays? January's usually slow. List January 2nd, I said. I have a move-in date of February 1st. I'd like to close before that. She absorbed this. Does your family know you're selling? My son is aware that the house will eventually be sold, I said pleasantly. He's not yet aware of the timeline. Michelle did not ask further questions. Good realtors know when not to. She came by on December 27th to do the formal walkthrough, measurements, photos, the staging assessment. We sat at the kitchen table afterward and went through the numbers. The mortgage had been paid off 4 years before Frank died. He'd made sure of that. What was left in the estate was mine entirely, cleanly, completely mine. Ready when you are, Michelle said. January 2nd, I repeated. She listed it on January 2nd. By January 9th, we had 3 offers. I accepted the strongest one. $890,000, conditional on a 30-day close. February 1st, nearly perfect. I did not tell my son. Christmas had been at his house this year, the whole family around their big table in Stony Creek. My daughter-in-law's parents there as well. A crowded and genuinely warm afternoon. My daughter-in-law had made trifle, my absolute favorite dessert, and I ate 2 helpings and played code names with the children after dinner and hugged everyone goodbye. On the drive home, I thought about how it was possible to love someone and still not trust them. Those 2 things could exist in the same body without canceling each other out. In January, I began sorting through 35 years of accumulated life. My son's old bedroom, hockey cards in shoeboxes, his high school track trophies, the blanket his grandmother had knitted him. I packed it all carefully, labeled the boxes, the furniture my daughter-in-law had admired over the years without ever quite asking for. I arranged for most of it to go through a consignment shop on Ottawa Street, proceeds to the food bank. The china that had been my mother's went to my cousin in Guelph, who'd always loved it. Frank's tools, his carefully maintained workshop in the basement. Those I donated to a men's shed program at the community center on Barton. I kept Frank's fishing rod. I kept the photo albums, all of them, paper and digital both. I kept my grandmother's pearls, which my daughter-in-law had once called dated, and which I found suddenly more beautiful than I had in years. Carol helped me find an estate sale company that would come in for 2 days in late January. Everything else, gone. The proceeds going to charity. I didn't tell my son about any of this. He called twice in January. Short calls, easy conversation. How was I feeling? Fine, thank you. What were my plans? Not sure yet, still thinking. Did I need anything? No, I was wonderful, thanks. My daughter-in-law had mentioned in December that the line of credit rate had gone up again. One of those comments shaped like information but meant to prompt an offer. I said that sounded very stressful and hoped they could sort it out and let the silence sit. January 28th arrived, a Thursday, pewter-colored and cold the way Hamilton does cold, properly and without apology. The moving company came at 8 in the morning. I'd hired professionals, the good kind who wrapped things carefully and didn't complain about the stairs. I supervised from the front hall in my warmest coat, coffee in hand. My son's car pulled up at 10. He got out slowly, looking at the truck, at the boxes already loaded, at the empty space in the bay window where the armchair used to be. His face went through several expressions quickly, the way faces do when the reality hasn't caught up to the information yet. Mum. He stopped on the front walk. What is this? I'm moving, I said. Moving. He repeated it the way people repeat things when the word isn't working. Moving where? The Harborview. It's an independent living community in Burlington, on the lake. I toured it in November. It's beautiful. He stood very still. You didn't say anything. No, I agreed. I didn't. Does Sandra know? No, I said. He looked at the moving truck. He looked at me. Mum, you can't just, this is the family home. You can't just sell it without. I've already sold it, I said. Closing was last week. I got $890,000. His mouth opened, closed. The new owners take possession February 1st. I'm moving into the Harborview today. It's all quite organized. 800. And he stopped. Started again. You sold the house. I did, without telling us. I looked at my son. He was 40 years old and he looked, right then, very young, the way he'd looked at Frank's funeral when everything was more than he knew how to hold. Part of me wanted to make it easier for him. That same part had been making things easier for him his entire life. I want to tell you something, I said. My voice was very calm. On my birthday, in November, I came to your house early. I let myself in with the key you gave me, and I stood in the mudroom and I heard you and your wife talking in the kitchen. He went still. I heard the conversation about the house, about the value, about the line of credit, about helping me get ready to move so that you could handle the sale. The blood had left his face. Mum, I'm not angry, I said. I want you to understand that. I'm not angry, but I am done making decisions that wait for everyone else's comfort. Your father is gone. This is my life. I've decided I'm going to live it. He put his hands over his face, then he dropped them. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." That conversation, Sandra and we've been so stressed about the finances, and I let it go somewhere I never should have. "You weren't supposed to. I never meant for you to." "I know," I said. "We were talking about you, like you were already." "I know," I said again, more gently. "That's why I'm doing this." The moving supervisor came to the door. "Mrs. Whitmore? We're about ready." "Thank you, David. I'll be right there." My son stood on the front walk of the house he'd grown up in, the maple tree bare behind him in the January cold. "The house is really sold, and I've redone my will. Your children each have trust funds that will be available to them when they turn 25. The rest is going to charity." He absorbed that slowly. "All of it? The grandchildren are looked after. The rest will go to organizations that help people who need it. Sick kids, the food bank, the YWCA." He nodded once, twice, the way he used to nod as a child when he was taking in something difficult. "Okay," he said, "okay. You can still be part of my life," I said, "if you want to. But it's my life, not a financial plan." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he crossed the walk and hugged me, his arms around my shoulders the way he hadn't done since Frank's funeral. He smelled like his father's aftershave, which he'd used since he was a teenager and which still, every single time, stopped my breath for just a moment. "I love you," he said. "I'm sorry." "I love you too," I said. "Go home to your family." I drove away from Herkimer Street without looking in the rearview mirror. I'd said goodbye to the rooms the night before, privately, the way I'd done everything through this process quietly, in my own time, on my own terms. The harbor view was everything Patricia had promised. My furniture arrived at the 4th floor apartment by 1 o'clock, and the movers had everything placed by 3. I stood on the balcony in the January cold and looked out at Lake Ontario, gray and vast and indifferent the way the Great Lakes are, ancient and unimpressed by human troubles. I could see the Burlington Lift Bridge from where I stood. Somewhere across the water, just visible in the haze, was the Toronto skyline. 35 years I'd lived in this city. I'd never once had a view like this. I put Frank's ashes on the dresser next to our wedding photo. "New adventure," I told him. He'd have liked this place. He'd always wanted to be closer to the water. The first week I met my neighbors. The woman across the hall was named Ruth, a retired school teacher from Oakville, widowed 6 years ago, brisk and funny and completely at home in herself. We had dinner together in the dining room on my 3rd night and talked for 2 hours about books and travel and the particular experience of being a woman of a certain age in a world that had mostly decided to stop looking at you. "It's actually quite freeing," Ruth said. "Once you get over the insult." The Harborview had a book club that met Tuesday evenings, a watercolor class on Thursday mornings, a walking group that did the Burlington Waterfront Trail twice a week, regardless of weather. I signed up for all 3. The walking group met on a Saturday morning in early February, 7 of us in parkas and good boots, and we walked along the lake path in the bright, cold, talking and laughing, and somewhere around the halfway point, I realized I hadn't thought about the house or the conversation or any of it in 3 days. My daughter-in-law did not call. I heard through my son, who called the week after I moved in, that she was angry, felt blindsided, felt it was unfair, felt that I'd made decisions that affected her without her input. I listened and didn't say much. Whatever she felt was hers to work through. My son came to visit on the 2nd Sunday in February. He brought my grandchildren, who ran to the balcony immediately and pressed their faces to the glass looking at the lake. My grandson wanted to know if the ice at the far edge was thick enough to skate on. My granddaughter wanted to know if she could sleep over sometime. "Whenever you like," I said. My son and I sat with tea after the children had settled with the puzzle I kept for visits. He looked better than he had on moving day, still tired around the eyes, but something had shifted in his face. Some held-in thing released. "Sandra and I have started seeing a financial counselor," he said, "to work on the debt. Actually work on it, not just hope something happens." "That's good," I said. That's really good. I told her what you heard. The whole conversation. He turned the mug in his hands. She said, she's not sorry she thought it. She's sorry I heard it. I nodded. I'm not excusing it, he said. Any of it. I've been letting her make me into someone I don't want to be. That's on me. He paused. Did you ever think about, is there any part of you that wonders why we ended up that way? Whether you and Dad maybe… Yes, I said, before he could finish. I've thought about it a lot. Your father and I made it too easy for you for too long. When times got hard, you'd come to us, and we'd smooth it over, and you never had to figure out a different way. I looked at him. That's not blame. That's just the account being read out clearly. He was quiet. I thought about that too. The important thing is what you do now, I said. You have 2 children who are going to watch everything you do and decide what's normal based on it. He nodded slowly. I want to do better. Then do better, I said. I'll be watching. Spring arrived late, the way it always does on the lake. But when it came all at once. The water going from iron gray to this impossible pale blue. The geese arriving on the trail in honking waves. The magnolias on the boulevard below bursting into color seemingly overnight. I began walking every morning before breakfast, the lake path out and back, 45 minutes that became the anchor of my days. In March, I signed up for the pottery class at the local art center, a Tuesday evening thing that had nothing to do with the harbor view. I was genuinely terrible at the wheel and genuinely delighted by this. The instructor, a young woman named B, with clay perpetually under her fingernails, laughed with me rather than at me, which is all you can ask. On a Friday evening in April, Ruth knocked on my door with a bottle of Niagara Riesling and the suggestion that we drink it on my balcony while the sun went down behind the escarpment. We did exactly that. The sky went orange and pink above the ridge, the lake below us darkening gradually, the lights of the city beginning to come on one by one. Do you miss it? Ruth asked. The house? I thought about that honestly. I miss Frank in the house, I said. I don't miss the house. That's a good answer. It took me a while to know the difference. My son brought the grandchildren every other Sunday. We had a system. The children chose the activity. I provided the supplies and the space and an appropriate level of grandmotherly enthusiasm. We built a birdhouse over 3 visits. We identified cloud types from the balcony with a library book. We made butter tarts from scratch on a rainy afternoon in May, my granddaughter up to her elbows in pastry dough and pleased about it. My daughter-in-law came once, in June. My son brought her without warning, which I suspected was deliberate on his part. No time for either of us to prepare a performance. She stood in my living room and looked at the lake view and the bookshelves and the framed photos, and something in her face moved in a way I hadn't seen before. It's really nice, she said. I didn't expect it's really nice. Thank you, I said. Tea? We sat on the balcony, the 3 of us, and we talked carefully about neutral things for the first half hour. My grandchildren's school, the traffic on the 403, her sister's new baby, and then, in the way things do when people are genuinely trying, the conversation found its way to something real. I owe you an apology, she said, not looking at me at first, looking at the water. What I said, what I was planning. It was I turned you into a number, and that's not okay. I waited. She looked at me then. I grew up watching my parents lose everything in the 2008 crash. My dad lost his business. We lost the house. I think I've been in survival mode ever since. She paused. That's not an excuse. But it's the truth. Thank you for telling me, I said. I don't know if we can fix this. That depends on what we do from here, I said. Not what happened in November. She nodded, slow and uncertain. But she stayed for dinner. My grandson made the city rep hockey team in the fall. I went to every home game I could manage, sitting in the arena with my travel mug of decaf and my warmest socks, watching him fly across the ice with that absolute fearlessness. After one game in October, he sat next to me in the stands while his parents talked to the coach, still in his full gear, sweaty and bright-eyed. "Grandma, how long are you going to live at the harbor view?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I like it there." "Why?" "I was just thinking." He wiped his face with the back of his glove. "My friend Tyler's grandma lives somewhere like that and she doesn't really go out much. But you go out lots." "I do." "Do you get lonely?" I thought about Ruth and the Riesling on the balcony, the pottery instructor laughing at my lopsided bowl, the Tuesday book club arguing about whether the ending of a novel was earned, the volunteers at the food bank warehouse I'd started helping at monthly, the camaraderie of moving boxes in a line, the simple utility of it. "Not often," I said. "And there's a difference between being alone and being lonely." He considered this with the seriousness of a 9-year-old encountering an idea slightly above him that he intended to grow into. "Yeah," he said, "I guess there is." A year after I moved to the harbor view, my son's family came for Thanksgiving dinner in the dining room downstairs. The kitchen staff did a proper turkey with all the trimmings, sweet potato, stuffing, cranberry sauce, the whole production. We pushed 2 tables together to fit everyone, my son and his wife, the children, and Ruth, whom I'd invited because she had no family nearby, and whom the grandchildren had adopted as an honorary great-aunt with no ceremony whatsoever. My granddaughter sat next to me and told me at length about her new art teacher, who was nice but not as good as her last art teacher. My grandson ate 3 helpings of stuffing and was unrepentant about it. My son and his wife sat across from me and argued companionably about whether the stuffing needed more sage, which is the argument of people who are genuinely all right with each other. After dessert, while my son helped the children with their coats in the lobby, my daughter-in-law and I stood at the tall windows looking out at the lake. November again, the water dark, the shoreline lights reflecting in the chop. "I still think about it," she said quietly. "That conversation. I think about it a lot." "Good," I said, not unkindly. "Does it? Are you ever going to forgive us?" I looked at the lake. Frank and I had scattered his mother's ashes off a dock in Muskoka years ago. I needed to take him to the ocean still. Tofino, maybe. He'd always wanted to see the Pacific coast. "I think forgiveness is something that happens gradually," I said. "Not a decision you make once." She nodded. "You're doing the work," I said. "That counts." My son appeared in the lobby waving his keys. My grandson had already made it to the door, hockey bag over one shoulder, impatient with the inefficiency of adults in parkas. My granddaughter was trying to convince Ruth to come see her school play. "She'll come," I called across the lobby. "We'll both come." Ruth raised her eyebrows at me over my granddaughter's head. I smiled. She sighed in the theatrical way of someone who had given up on dignity and found the result surprisingly pleasant. Later, after they'd all gone and the dining room had been cleared and the other residents had drifted back to their apartments, I took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked out onto my balcony in my coat. November. The wind off the lake with real teeth in it. The city lights rippled in the water below. The lift bridge was lit up, its reflection broken by the chop into scattered gold. I'd lived in this city my entire adult life. I'd never actually looked at it before. You don't, when you're inside it, when you're moving through it with a list of things to do and a mortgage to pay and a family to worry about. You have to get a little distance to see what you've been living in all along. I thought about the morning of my birthday, standing in my son's mudroom in my stocking feet, my mouth open and no words coming out. I thought about the drive to Tim Hortons and the double-double and the gray November street. I thought about sitting across from Mr. Patterson and watching him write down exactly what I needed. No argument, no softening. I thought about the moment I signed the offer on the Herkimer house and felt, unexpectedly, not grief, but release. I hadn't been waiting to die. I'd been waiting to start. The wind shifted off the lake, cold and clean, carrying the particular smell of inland water that I had apparently loved my entire life without ever thinking to mention it. I pulled my coat tighter and stayed where I was. I was 65 years old. I had a balcony with a lake view, a book club that fought passionately about literary fiction, a pottery bowl of genuinely spectacular ugliness sitting on my kitchen windowsill, and a grandson who had just made rep hockey. I had a son who was doing the hard work of becoming someone better. I had a granddaughter who wanted me at her school play. I had a friend who would bring Riesling and sit in the wind with me without requiring a reason. I had a trip to plan, Tofino, the Pacific. Frank in his carved wooden box, the ocean he never got to see. I had, it turned out, quite a lot left to do, and not a single person on this earth had given it to me. I had chosen it. Every last bit of it I had chosen for myself. That, I thought, standing in the November wind above the shining lake, was the only inheritance worth anything. The life you decide to live while you are still, undeniably, alive. I went inside and made tea and started looking up flights to Vancouver.